Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the People's Voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am the People's Voice. Thank you again for checking out the podcast this week. As always, it is greatly appreciated. As always, we thank everyone who has taken some time to listen to the podcast today. We do understand that you could be utilizing your time to do something else, so we are appreciative that you're taking that time to spend with us. As always, if this information is valuable and you find it to be enlightening and worth sharing, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast and turn on notifications. And also, when you subscribe to the podcast, if you could review the podcast, we greatly appreciate that as well. As I explained, I think on the last podcast, it allows our distributors to kind of get a gauge of who's listening to the podcast. Obviously, they know, but with the reviews as well, it helps because that way it helps to extend our reach and get us and give us the opportunity to give more people this information. But the podcast can be heard on all podcast platforms. We put out a new episode each and every Friday. And then we also put out a video on YouTube every Wednesday as well for those who would like to watch the podcast. But in any event, we say welcome and welcome to the People's Voice podcast. So today, I wanted to get into the topic of government spending. And I wanted to talk specifically about this today because there's been so much conversation in the last month with the change in the new administration here in the United States. We have a new president. I don't know where you're at in the world listening to this, but I'm sure you know as well. We have a new president, re-elected for a second term, President Donald J. Trump. Why do I know his middle initial? I don't know. But since he's been elected, he, I guess in the first, I wanted to say first 30 days, and it hasn't even been 30 days yet. He's made a lot of, I don't want to say changes, but he's attempted to make a lot of changes early on, especially when it comes to reviewing government spending in various areas of the government. And so one of the areas that he started to immediately look at was in terms of government employees. So today I want to talk about government spending. I want to kind of focus on government spending in really three areas. Number one, I just want to cover, how much is being spent, at least on civilian workers that work for the federal government. So I think that's definitely a big conversation. Secondly, I want to talk about, how much is actually being spent and where it's being spent in terms of tax dollars. And then lastly, I want to talk about our debt and how much we owe, and then kind of how much we owe and who we owe the money to. That's what I want to say. So that's what I want to focus on today. So I think I'll start with civilian workers that are currently working for the federal government. And I wanted to look this up first because I had no idea, first of all, how many civilian workers the federal government actually employed. I had no idea. Now, full disclosure, I know a ton of people that work for the government, that are government contractors or that are directly employed for various agencies. But I had no idea how many across the country are actually employed by the federal government. And so I wanted to look that up. And more importantly, I want to understand how much was being spent because, again, the Trump and his cabinet are very focused on reducing the size of government. I've heard that, several times. So I said, well, how big is it? And I'll be honest, I didn't know. But I know now, and so I want to talk about that a little bit. So in order to get this information, I went to the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, better known as, to get kind of a breakdown of how many employees work for the federal government. And they did a study called Comparing the Compensation of Federal and Private Sector Employees. And this was back in 2022. And I'm sure, for studies of this size, they usually do it, 2 and 3 year increments because of the amount of data that needs to be collected. So I would have to assume that this is the most recent one until another one comes out, either later this year or possibly next year. But as of 2022, it states here that the federal government employed over 2.3 million civilian workers, or about 1.4% of the U.S. workforce, in jobs that represented over 650 occupations at more than 100 agencies, which I didn't even realize that either. It competes with the private sector employers for people who possess the mix of attributes needed to do the work for its various agencies. So that was good information for me, because again, I didn't know the size of the workforce that was employed by the federal government. But most importantly, what I found out is that it says here in fiscal year 2022, the federal government spent roughly $271 billion to compensate those civilian employees. About 60% of that total was spent on civilian personnel working in the Department of Defense, the Department of Veteran Affairs, and the Department of Homeland Security. Okay, so that's what the numbers are. Now, as a taxpayer, I want a government that is running fiscally efficient. That's what I want as a taxpayer. I want to be very clear about that.
All I'm doing is presenting the facts.
So, if that means that there has to be a reduction of the workforce, I'm okay with that, but it has to be for the benefit of running operationally efficiently and fiscally efficiently. Now, as you can hear the hesitation in my voice, because as I opened up and I said, I know many people that work for the federal government. So, it's kind of the not in my backyard type of thing, right? It's called NIMBY for those who may not know that acronym. But, you want something done, you just don't want it to happen, around you. So, I'm very conflicted with that. But at the same time, as a taxpayer, I do want an efficient government. So I understand some of his position regarding that. Just want to make that clear. So $271 billion is being sent. Now you may say $271 billion, Trey, that's a lot of money that we're paying for people to work for the government. And it is. I don't want to get misconstrued. But in terms of the grand scheme of things, where money is really being spent in this country, it's not even the tip of the iceberg. It really isn't. Breaking it down even further. So the United States government and its annual budget is broken down into, several different areas. I would say roughly about 7 areas. Well, I shouldn't say that. I would say about 5 major areas where your money, the tax dollars are being spent. And then after that, it gets kind of broken down into different and various other programs and other things of that nature. But here in the United States, the bulk of tax dollars that are being spent on healthcare insurance. Okay. And healthcare insurance here in the United States typically deals with Medicare. And for those who don't know, Medicare is It's health insurance that's usually provided to individuals who are 65 years or older, who obviously don't have the economic means to have, private insurance. They can utilize Medicare. Now, Medicaid is in there, but Medicaid is a little tricky because it is also paid for by the individual states, and Medicaid is for generally for individuals who are below the poverty line, or basically below the poverty line, poor individuals who can't afford health insurance. And then you also now have the ACA, the American Care Act, better known as Obamacare, which allows individuals to kind of get health insurance as well, and then that cost is supplemented. But health insurance here in the United States is the number one expenditure when it comes to tax dollars here in the United States. Now, why am I harping on that? I'm harping on that because that expense is part of the reason why today the United States has so much debt. Jumping around just real quickly, just for edification purposes. So as of today, and I'm reading this from first fiscal data treasury.gov. As of today, the United States owes $36 trillion in debt. And that's with a T. Now, keep in mind that this debt, this $36 trillion in debt, is owed in various different ways. So there's treasury notes that are out there. There are domestic investors, individuals who own treasury notes. There's banks. There's a whole lot of in there. But $36 trillion is owed. And also keep in mind that $36 trillion is since the inception of America as a country. From matter of fact, going right back to this information from fiscal data treasury.gov. It says the U.S. American debt, the U.S. has carried debt since its inception, which I just said. Debts occurred during the American Revolutionary War, amounted to $75 million, primarily borrowed from domestic investors in the French government for war materials. So this money
is slavery
that's owed has been owed, 200, 300 years. I don't even know, 1789. Yeah, you're talking about 200 plus years. But going back in terms of what we pay. So again, we pay $271 billion to pay civilian workers to work for the federal government. Medicare and Medicaid cost us well over $1 trillion a year. And Medicare itself is really what the issue is, because Medicare costs are about $850 billion. Matter of fact, let me play this from USA Facts. They had Steve Ballmer. For those who don't know, Steve Ballmer is former CEO for Microsoft. And he actually did a bit. I know people are saying this is who you're going to talk about. Yeah, but he broke this down in terms of Medicare and Medicaid costs. But I want to play this, and then I'll kind of go into talking a little bit more about the debt and some of the fraud that's associated with Medicare. Then I'll close out from there. So this is from USA Facts, which I thought was a good breakdown of what is being spent in terms of healthcare insurance in this country.
Item, which is Medicare. Medicare cost the federal government about $850 billion in 2023, and that's about 14% of all of our federal spending. The bulk of the spending provides health insurance for anyone 65 and older. Today, Medicare covers 67 million Americans, or about 1 in 4 adults. And in 2022, which is the most recent year released, we spend about $16,000 per beneficiary per year. Medicare's share of the federal budget has increased from 10% in 1994 to 14% as the number of enrollees in the program has continued to grow with our aging population.
And I'm stopping it there. Now, as you saw there, 14% of our budget, and this is basically what is coming in to what is going out, 14% of that is spent on Medicare alone.
Okay. I ain't passed the ball, but I know a little bit.
So in that, you go, again, of course, we want to make sure that our aging population is being taken care of and anything that they need in terms of health care, because we all will get old one day. We want that covered. The problem is that spending is also very much affected by a tremendous amount of fraud that is occurring, specifically when you talk about Medicare and in Medicaid as well, but really in Medicare. There was a story done by CNBC just a couple of years ago about how much is being stolen in Medicare and Medicaid fraud. I want to play this piece, and then I want to talk a little bit more about the debt that is owed, and then I'll close out from there. So this is from CNBC, because it's estimated that about $100 billion a year, and this is an estimate is being stolen in Medicaid fraud here in the United States. So let me play this, and then I'll kind of go back and close out from there.
Business that is really keeping us busy here.
Durable medical equipment, DME. Think braces and wheelchairs. Fraudsters buy lists of patients and doctors so they can steal from the government.
And with those two key pieces of information, it can sit at a place that is open Wi-Fi and just start submitting claims to Medicare.
And again, that was from CNBC. And from what I understand from this report, Florida is like ground zero for a lot of this fraud that is occurring. So my retort back to the administration, President Trump and his administration, is what are we going to do about the Medicaid and Medicare fraud that is occurring? Because I get you want to run an efficient government, but clearly there's a tremendous issue with fraud in terms of health insurance. And since health insurance is one of the biggest expenditures in our country, I think that might be an opportunity for the country to save money as well. Instead of just looking at cutting employee staffs and also other programs that are not anywhere close to this. Because I think in that same report that I was reading from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, in terms of other programs like USAID, matter of fact, that he just cut, they are not spending anywhere near the amount that we are spending on health insurance. And matter of fact, many of those programs are not even spending the amount that is being taken in healthcare, Medicaid and Medicare fraud. So I think those are areas that have to be looked at in order to provide a more effective path, if you will, to help reduce this deficit that we're in, or this debt that we owe, because we owe $36 trillion. Okay, that's nothing to sleep on.
Look, brother, debt is slavery.
And so if we continue on this path, this country is going to be severely, severely broken. And that none of us, we want to see that. So I'm hoping that this new administration will look at all of the spending and not just focus on just areas such as civilian workers or, discretionary spending programs that are not even spending anywhere near the amount that's being taken in terms of Medicare and Medicaid fraud. So, but that's what I want to cover today. I really want to kind of conceptualize it. It's so much information that, to condense it into a 20-minute conversation is sometimes challenging. But as always, I'll post all of this information into the video so you can check these links yourself. Of course, if you want to leave a comment, you can reach me at the People's Voice Podcast on Instagram. You could also reach us you can reach me at I am Trey Evans on all social media platforms. And of course, you can leave comments on the YouTube or on the podcast, your podcast app pages. And of course, we will respond to all comments regarding this. But that's my time for today. As always, dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the People's Voice. Tell somebody about the dream. Salute.